CityCast is brought to you by Wise, the app for international people using money around the globe. With Wise, you can send, spend, and receive up to 40 currencies with only a few simple taps and save up to 55% compared to major banks. Plus, Wise won't add hidden fees to your transfer. Whether you're buying souvenirs with pesos in Puerto Vallarta or sending euros to tip your Coliseum tour guide, you know you're getting a fair exchange rate with no extra markups. Be smart. Join the 15 million customers who choose Wise. Download the Wise app today or visit wise.com. Learn more by visiting wise.com/US/compare. T's and C's apply.
Today on CityCast DC, DC Jazz Fest is happening now through Labor Day weekend, and I can't help but feel a little sentimental about it. My father recently passed away, and that man loved DC Jazz. I can still hear him calling me up on some random Tuesday night and saying, "Let's go for jazz." I grew up in DC's jazz club, so for me, the story of jazz in the city isn't just the sound of the district, it's the sound of my childhood. So to mark the start of Jazz Fest, we're re-airing a conversation that I had with my co-host Michael Schaffer about jazz earlier this summer, where we talked about the history and present of jazz in DC and how you can experience it almost the same way that I did. Today's Thursday, August 28th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
I'm good. So I'm really glad we're doing this because you are going to teach me and all our listeners how to be a good DC jazz fan.
I hope so. I don't know that I'm like the expert, but it is something I have a little bit of familiarity with. So hopefully I can sort of get folks on the right. If you're interested in jazz in DC and exploring what DC has to offer in terms of jazz, hopefully I can like at least set people in the right direction.
Well, so tell us about your journey, because this is actually a very sweet and personal story for you.
It is. I mean, like all niche interests, it was passed down to me by my father, like all niche interests that like youth get involved in. My late father spent a lot of time in DC. He was a huge fan of live jazz, specifically like live jazz performed around DC. And so I really grew up in DC's jazz clubs. Like literally I would be like an 8-year-old girl in a dark jazz club on U Street. I grew up in those clubs, really. Wow.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, what could go wrong? I mean,
wait, how did they treat you as an 8-year-old girl?
Oh, everyone loved it. I have so many, like, my mom wasn't a big jazz fan, so I was, like, generally my father's, like, quote, date to these clubs. Uh-huh. And, like, this is so silly, but, like, he always wore a black leather beret when he was going to a jazz club. So, like, I had a little black leather beret, and people...
That's pretty adorable.
It was adorable. There's like literally pictures of me like at 8 wearing a black leather beret in a jazz club. I'm not totally sure that it was legal to have kids in nightclubs in DC, but I think when you've got like an 8-year-old in a black leather beret trying to see some jazz, man, I think they look the other way. I think the owners
want to mess with that.
Yeah, the owners look the other way.
So I think of my own children, or maybe myself when I was a child, as way too ADHD to like sit through a jazz show. But you were cool with it.
I actually think, so I also was a child who had ADHD. I actually think jazz is a style of music that actually would be good because it like, from where a note starts, you never know where it's going to end. And it's like quite like loud. And it's like, yeah, I loved it. I wasn't like faking my way through it to please my dad. I really enjoyed it. And like, I loved being in these spaces full of adults who seemed like cool and kind of like counterculture. So if you're thinking about taking an 8-year-old to a jazz club, I cannot speak to the legality of that, but I think they would have a good time.
Wait, so let's nerd out about the DC piece of this. So DC, I think of DC as one of the epicenters, one of the capitals of Black American culture. It is the home of Howard University. It has this long tradition of political leadership, intellectual leadership. I don't think of it as like one of the big jazz cities of the United States. I think of New York, I think of New Orleans. Am I wrong in that?
You are a little bit wrong. So you're right in that jazz originated in New Orleans, and it's really a style of music that is like deeply, directly connected to the Black American experience. And because DC has always been this major city for Black folks, as you said, DC was really vital in terms of like the early movement of jazz taking hold. And, you know, back in the day, DC was deeply segregated, but this was also during Prohibition. So like U Street became this home of like a couple thousand speakeasies where you could go drink illegally and also hear live jazz performed. And so a lot of historians actually credit that with helping integrate DC between Black and white, because everybody wanted to come to these clubs and drink liquor and hear jazz music. And so that's kind of like one of the reasons why DC, particularly U Street, but other areas in the city really were integral to the early days of jazz, but also the early roots of jazz in DC.
And obviously, like a lot of very famous musicians played those clubs. Who does DC claim as someone who's not just who was born or raised here, but whose sort of music took root here and who formed their first bands here? I know we've got the Ellington Bridge, but
yes.
I don't always associate with his music with DC. Maybe I'm wrong in that too.
Well, he was born in DC, and like, just to be clear, like when you're on U Street and you see murals dedicated to jazz, it's because U Street was known as Black Broadway, and like U Street was and always has been sort of DC's standout jazz area. They had so many clubs where so many famous folks, names that you probably know, performed. There's the Lincoln Theater, which opened back in 1921 and was really a focal point for jazz on U Street. It served the Black community in DC during segregation. Duke Ellington performed there, so like very famous. What was known as the Music Hall, which is now 930 Club, Ella Fitzgerald performed there, Cab Calloway performed there, Lionel Hampton and his orchestra performed there. Bohemian Caverns is a place that I have a little bit of a soft spot for. I know they had to close maybe it was around 10 years ago. They closed kind of under unfortunate circumstances. But that
a girl with a black beret was caught there, and the cops said no more.
An 8-year-old in a black beret. But that club was like really known for Washington's sort of elite to see Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway. And fun fact about that spot, in 1959, Tony Taylor and Angelo Alvino bought the club and really turned it into like DC's premier spot. They booked folks in the 60s like Miles Davis, Nina Simone, Charles Mingus, John Coltrane, all of these like huge names. And in 1964, Ramsey Lewis recorded the critically and commercially successful album, the Ramsey Lewis Trio, at Bohemian Caverns. And so I don't know what Bohemian Caverns is now, but I remember going there with my dad to hear jazz being performed on the night of Obama's first election, right? So like it was a mainstay on the area in terms of jazz in DC. What if adjusting home comfort, winter to summer, was as easy as flipping a record? It can be when you plug into an energy-efficient electric heat pump. Side 1, warm it up. Ready for side 2? Cool it now. Just flip the switch. Your wallet will thank you, the planet too. And right now, get up to $5,000 off from the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, or DCSEU, when you give up gas for an efficient electric heat pump. Income-qualified residents upgrade at no cost. These record rebates won't last. Make the switch today. Visit dcseu.com/electric.
Hey, remember that amazing little cafe you discovered last summer with the perfect latte and the crazy view? Or that sweet hiking spot your friend told you about but you can't remember the name? With Overlook Maps, special places never get lost again. You can create personal lists of places you've been and want to go. Build your must-visit list for your next vacation, your foodie favorites for date nights, or your weekend getaways when you need to escape. Share your favorite hidden gems with friends and family. Let them discover that incredible barbecue joint you found, or that scenic outlook that takes your breath away. Or keep your secret spots completely private. Planning a trip with friends? Create a shared list where everyone can add their ideas. Visiting a new city? Check out lists from locals who know the real gems, not just the tourist traps. And here's the best part. There will be no ads cluttering your lists. No one selling your data to advertisers. Just your personal collection of amazing places organized exactly how you want them. Overlook Maps. Collect, organize, and share the places that matter to you. Download free at overlookmaps.com and check out overlookmaps.com/DC to see some of our lists and great spots on a map in your pocket. Your places, your way. So talk about how this changed. Like we've got, like you painted this great picture of the Prohibition era where people would go to speakeasies. It was a rare place of white people and black people socially being in the same space, even if they weren't necessarily at the same table. After World War II, the culture changes. Jazz is not quite as central as it was. And DC changes, right? There's white flight. There's, social segregation is still a constant, but who's here and where they are here changes. How did the DC jazz world change with it?
Yeah, I mean, like so much of DC, sort of general urban decline in the 60s to the 80s related to the riots after MLK's assassination, and then just like general economic shifts. So then all of these clubs that were having this like heyday closed down as that whole U Street area was really, undergoing just like decline. You also had like go-go becoming more popular and sort of shifting DC's cultural soundscape. And so like, at a time when you thought about the sound of Black DC, it was jazz. Around the like 1980s, that was becoming replaced with go-go, which is a style of music I also love. I don't want to make it seem like I'm like anti-go-go.
Right. But, like a friend of CityCast and of me, Brianna Thomas, wrote this book of pictures of old U Street. And you look at these pictures of jazz clubs from the 20s and stuff, and everyone's dressed really nicely because the culture was such that you got dressed up nice to go out in those days. By the 80s, there's been riots. U Street is being dug up for the metro. It's a much, much rougher place. And the sort of, again, the culture of like, let's go to a nice place and act fancy because we're on a date and we'll watch some jazz. Like that culture has shifted in music. And I guess DC shifted with it.
Exactly. And so there was still like an undercurrent of jazz in the city during this time, but it wasn't like what you described, like getting dressed up to go see, a night of good jazz. It was like smaller, more intimate venues or, jazz really being upheld by academic institutions like Howard University, right? Like,
which is kind of like putting it in a museum.
Exactly, exactly.
No disrespect to academics, but when the academics celebrate something, it tends to be maybe a little bit after it's at its most vital point.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And then you mentioned U Street being dug up for the metro. In the 90s, there really was this renewed interest in jazz and the preservation of that legacy, specifically in DC. And I think part of it really was like revitalizing and boosting U Street that happened in the 90s, when they put in the metro and they built the Reeves Center in 1986, so like late 80s. The Department of Housing and Urban Development having these like Remembering U Street grants, which like put up historic properties and improved dilapidated storefronts along U and 14th. Like all of that was really integral to sort of the revival of jazz that we saw in the late 80s and early 90s as part of a revival of U Street in general.
So bring us up to today. What if you're going to go out to watch jazz, if you were to take me out, I would wear a leather beret. Where would you take me? And would I be mocked?
Well, you might be mocked for the beret, although I think the beret is coming back. Like my dad passed away in November, and my dad was like he was my guy. Like he was my like, everything cool about me was like planted in me by my dad. I'll put it that way.
I'm going to say I didn't know your dad, but I know you've talked about him. I expect he could pull some stuff off that maybe Mike Schaffer could not.
I would agree with that. Although I have to say, it's so funny that you say this. I've actually thought before, my dad would have loved you. I wish that y'all have gotten to me because he would have really gotten a kick out of you for sure. So like one of the spots for jazz in DC, which I spent my youth in, I was there when it opened in 2000. Unfortunately, it did not survive the pandemic, but Twins Jazz, like if we had been doing this interview pre-pandemic, that would have been the spot. So like RIP to Twins. It was opened by these two Ethiopian sisters. It survived in DC for like 30 years almost, and then it closed during the pandemic. It wasn't even supposed to have jazz. It was these two sisters just wanted to open an Ethiopian restaurant. They started booking jazz performers, and eventually it was named one of the top 100 jazz clubs in the world by Downbeat magazine. It was teeny tiny, and that made it great because like you could really hear the music and really like feel the music. So that's where I would take you if it had not closed down. But I wanted to shout it out quickly because it was such a special spot to me.
What about other places that we go right now?
So right now, a couple of good spots to go to are JoJo's. It was actually the last place I ever saw jazz with my dad before he passed away. JoJo's is good. I will say for people go to these spots because they want to hear good jazz music. JoJo's has excellent food, but you don't really go to some of these spots for the service, if that makes sense. So just like keep that in mind, that the reason why these places are like thriving is not because they're providing excellent service. They're providing jazz at a time where jazz clubs are, there are not that many of them. So keep that in mind if you go to any of these spots. JoJo's, the vibe is great. They always have good performers. I will say about JoJo's, make reservations. JoJo's is at 1518 U Street Northwest. So like it is a great spot, but it's tiny. And so if you don't make reservations, they might put you upstairs where you're like watching the performance. Like you're not even really watching the performance. So don't assume like who is going to see jazz on a Saturday night. I can certainly get in there with no reservation. No, you can't make reservations.
Where else is big right now?
I would say Mr. Henry's in Capitol Hill. That spot's a little bit more neighborhoody. Like it is definitely like the crowd is older. If you're there to like really see a legit jazz performance, that's where I would send you. I actually enjoy the food, but again, I wouldn't be going there because I'm expecting like stellar service. If you were interested in like an upscale kind of good for a date spot to see some jazz, I might send you to St. Vincent's Wine Bar. They do jazz. A dynamite service, fancier place, but like that would be where I would send you if you were like looking to impress your date with your knowledge of jazz and wine.
So tell me, like, what's the scene like? Like, who's in the crowd? I think of jazz now as like, it's not like it's a totally obscure form of music, but it is by no means like the kind of mainstream, I think most culturally literate people probably can't name many sort of currently active jazz musicians. So is it like old people? Is it like just like impossibly smart young people who I can't relate to? Who's there?
So this is why I love going to see jazz in DC, because it is such a diverse crowd. You get older folks, you get Black folks, you get like sort of young, hip white folks. It is just a really interesting crowd to be in. And I think it's a crowd that really reflects DC because jazz is, unfortunately, a niche interest. And so the kind of people who are brought to see jazz or like inspired to go see jazz on a Saturday night, like those are the kind of folks who are maybe a little bit offbeat. And I love that.
What are they wearing? I mean, is it like, do I need to wear a beret for one? And beyond that, can I show up looking like a schlub?
I mean, I wouldn't say there's a dress code. I mean, definitely come as you are. But a lot of jazz clubs are frequented by older Black folks, right? And y'all know how older Black folks can be like. So you should be able to feel comfortable with whatever you're wearing. But don't be surprised when like there's an older Black auntie in like head to toe fancy garments, if that makes sense.
That would upscale my evening by my average evening so much.
And if you're looking for like a lower key spot to just hear some jazz, they do have jazz at Mark's Cafe in Mount Pleasant, 10 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. every Tuesday. That is like a very accessible, easy entrance way to just experience some jazz in a more sort of low key setting.
And you can just walk in, no reservations.
I've heard some talk of there maybe is a cover now, but I cannot confirm that myself. But the times I've been, you can just like drop in and hear some good jazz, like very accessible.
So how do they, if you're not paying at the door, I'm curious how the performers are getting paid. And for that matter, who are the performers? I guess this is probably not a thing where you can quit your day job anymore.
That's a good question. I mean, I have definitely seen, like, if you go to spots like Blues Alley, like, that is a legitimate club for, like, jazz professionals, like, touring musicians. So there are definitely people who are making a very good living as professional musicians. Maybe they're not, like, selling their trio that has their first name as the name of the band. Maybe they're doing backing for other performers and things like that. But there are certainly people who are making a living, as full-time professional jazz musicians in the United States. I get the sense that maybe that is a dwindling pursuit just by the way, the music industry is shaped. But there are definitely, like, if you want to see, like, a professional performer who has probably been touring worldwide, definitely check out Blues Alley.
So what's the future here? You said Twins had closed. I know for any kind of night spot, whether it's music or not, it's a really tough, thin margins industry. But is there a sense of threat against the places that are still doing jazz?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a bittersweet question. Jazz was so integral to DC and Black DC. It makes me sad that a lot of these iconic places to see jazz in DC have closed. And Mike, I know that we were talking about this once, how like luxury apartment buildings will spring up in DC with names like the Ellington or like the Vaughn. And it's like kind of an empty nod to like what was once there. That is absolutely happening when it comes to DC jazz clubs, where a jazz club will close, become condos, and the condo name will harken back to its jazz roots. But it's like, well, you're kind of displacing the jazz club that was there. Condo. Yes, exactly. However, I do think that DC is still a solid jazz city. Like if you wanted to see a night of jazz, there are places to do that in DC. Before my dad died, he was notorious for, my parents lived in Richmond before they passed away recently. And, my dad would call me up from the interstate being like, hey, what are you doing tonight? I'm riding up to DC for jazz. Book some tickets, and then hang up. And so then it was my job to be like, okay, well, who's playing? And there was always something playing, right? And so like, I never had a trouble finding a last minute place to see some really good jazz music in DC. And we have things like the DC Jazz Festival that are really doing the work of keeping jazz in the district alive. So I will say, even as a lot of the places to see jazz in DC have closed because of things like rent and just like the business of urban life in general, DC is still a very solid jazz city.
But before we stop, what's the DC Jazz Festival?
So DC's Jazz Fest is Labor Day weekend. It's August 27th through the 31st, 2025. They've got a pretty good lineup here. Branford Marsalis, who is like a very famous musician. The Sun Ra Orchestra, which I've actually seen multiple times in DC and is phenomenal. So yeah, if folks are interested in the DC Jazz Fest, definitely check it out because this lineup actually looks pretty sick.
Well, Bridget, I hope you will bring me out with you.
Oh, anytime. I've got a beret with your name on it.
I'll see you later.
Thanks, Mike. That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our great morning newsletter. And don't forget to become a neighbor. It's just $10 a month. You get great perks and the knowledge that you're supporting the local journalism that we do here, which is more important than ever now. Just head to membership.citycast.fm to join. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.